Hi, good evening. Today is August 6th, Friday. We had jobs report today with a large beat above expectations. 943,000 jobs were added and unemployment rate went down 5.4 from 5.9%. S&P 500 closed up for the week, but failed to get to 4450 level, which we were anticipating. Perhaps it was saved for Monday. We had made new highs today of 44.33, just barely exceeding the highs of last week, 44.22 on ES futures. And so we basically traded most of the week in the last week's range, within 1 point on the downside and exceeding, like I said, by 10 points on the upside or so. The expectations that I had of the week range expanding just barely came through, so basically not much at all. So even the exciting jobs report failed to propel the market much in either direction. We're still trading mostly in that choppy range and just broke above it just today recently and not by much. The vol trigger level is around 44.10. And so as long as we are above 4400, 4410, it's still kind of bullish. But if we do break below the 44 level, I think 4350 could come rather quickly next week. And I guess the market keeps staying woke as Cuomo is fighting his against all the odds, his resignation, and he just wouldn't resign even though the pressure mounts. I wonder how long he could hold up. Bonds had an interesting week. They have finally sold off and closed down for the week after the jobs report. I guess the expectations that given that the economy is strong, the Fed is going to taper sooner rather than later, and some various speakers were hinting at that.
Yeah, the longer bonds really sold off, but then also, long bonds really sold off, but even the 10-year, some pretty sharp sell-offs this week.
Right, and perhaps the bonds sell-off have affected Nasdaq today, which closed down 0.5 percentage point after making new highs yesterday and failing to follow through today. So the Nasdaq looks a little bearish to me, unless it breaks out strongly early next week. So even though Nasdaq was very woke today, apparently maybe it's a little too woke for Nasdaq, it didn't help. There was a greater push by Nasdaq for diversity in the corporate boards, and it has been approved today. The proposal is going to include some certain requirements for gender and ethnic diversity. And the target is for most of the companies to have at least one woman director, as well as a director who self-identifies as a racial minority or as a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. So company would also be required to disclose diversity statistics about the boards. We talked about this before. It's kind of funny how your race and gender matters over your qualifications, but that's the woke world we live in. So
whatever happened to making a profit,
Right. It's no longer about profit. Federal Reserve also talks about all of those issues. So it's still not completely approved. Maybe it will get overturned, but for now it's all steam ahead. And I wonder why wouldn't they just make quotes for all jobs across the country that every job has to mirror within, let's say, 5 percentage point, the racial, gender, and other LGBTQ and other letters population. And so just make every job then. Why only the Nasdaq boards, and why only one woman? I think, I'm offended. It should be 50% women.
Well, if you there's some companies, especially like in media, fashion industries, where I would say women and gay people are very overrepresented compared to the population. It's just been a place where people can have careers, and it didn't matter what their their sex was, or whether they were gay or not, and rise to the top. Even in the dark old days of whatever the 80s, and you know, they're not, I guess, thinking about those companies, right?
Right. I think somebody posted on Twitter and I retweeted it. We don't have enough female roofers. You know, it's such a high paying and easy job to sit in a roof all day in 100 degrees heat in Florida, or probably above that if you're on the roof. And I don't think I've seen one female roofer here. It's mostly South American or Mexican guys, and women, especially white women, are underrepresented. But anyway, this is nonsense. But if the bonds keep moving down, I wouldn't be surprised that Nasdaq could be trading down and testing maybe even 14,000 level if the sell-off in bonds continues.
What I think is interesting though is that the Russell 2000 moved just in reverse, and so it rallied really nicely, and so it's like we're seeing this divergence between big cap tech and smaller cap companies, and so I think that's really interesting, and this type of behavior, obviously, this goes back to one of my favorite things to follow, which is, you know, like ARK Innovation, which now they tend to have bigger cap companies like a Tesla and so on, or Apple and so on. So, you know, like a Tesla was down 2.17% today, and ARK Innovation Fund was down 2.04%. So pretty much in line with Tesla, but a lot of smaller cap companies really were rallying pretty nicely today.
Right. And what I saw that Tesla was down today partly because Kathy is actually selling Tesla and has been for the last couple of days. They're reducing their position, maybe in favor of buying Robinhood. But also Tesla, surprisingly, wasn't invited to the White House EV event, which kind of a snub to Tesla. Even Elon Musk even tweeted, it seems odd that Tesla wasn't invited. And during that EV event, they promised roughly 50% of the auto fleet on the roads by 2030 will be electric. So it seems a little high, I think, by an order of magnitude. But, you know, projections are not reality, so nobody cares.
Well, and I would say the reason why they didn't have them at the White House is because Tesla is not a union company, unionized company. And so similar to, you know, like Toyota or Honda, they employ more people in the US than, let's say, GM or Chrysler, right? And because there are more Toyotas made in the United States, or majority of what's sold in the United States is made in the United States, or assembled in the United States at least. And so they're you know, often not at the table, even though they employ more Americans, and they pay better wages and they have better benefits than the big three, and they're just non-union companies. Now, I'm not opposed to unions, but at the same time, I think that's the motivator why you wouldn't be invited to something like that when they really are doing innovation. I mean, we can debate whether or not EVs are worth having, but they've done a lot of innovation in the space and made it kind of a sexy thing to have, and you know, to try to create a truck or self-driving cars and some of these things that, whether or not it's a good idea, it's like, is anybody from GM trying this? Well, not publicly, at least, you know. And so there's it's why would you not want an innovator, somebody who's representing innovation at a White House event? It seems odd, kind of maybe petty, you know.
Right, and especially the one who pretty much started an EV in America. So
right,
it's very strange for Tesla, but the White House does lots of strange things. But looking at the Robinhood chart, obviously it's everybody could see, it's an insane move. We had, it traded as high as $85, which is 80% move since the prior close. And it's also plus 8% today. So what happened is, I think, if I'm correct, it was gamma squeezed because the option trading started and just early in the week, and 70 was the highest strike that was available, and that's exactly where it closed. So it seems like a lot of option activity propelled it higher, and then once it all settled in, it's quickly sold off after the expiration. And today it was up 8% again as the insider sales were postponed, and people got excited that the shorts could be squeezed again. And now there is a strike at 170, so there is hope that it will trade as high as that. There's hope yet. But after that move the day before at 44 or $45, whatever it was closed, we were saying that I wouldn't be surprised if the move continues, because it's one of those crazy stocks that it's a perfect meme. You know, everybody knows it, and it's one of those stocks that Wall Street bets would love to squeeze. Obviously, I never thought it's going to be that high, but this is the market we have right now, where option traders could squeeze various stocks just by buying high call volume options far out of the strike, far out of money.
Some of the moves in Moderna and Novavax, that Moderna has continued to rally. I think that it's perceived as having the best risk profile, as well as the best resistance to Delta variant and some of these other variants. And so I think the market has rewarded it. The other one that's been performing really well in this space is Pfizer, of course, which is yesterday, it hit a high that it had not seen in 10 years, at least. And so it had been higher at one point, but you have to go back further than my charting service. So both of those are performing really well. And then on the other hand, Novavax just got killed. They rallied pretty nicely earlier this week, or early in the week. And I believe that was it was earlier this week that they rallied earlier this week on new good data coming out on their COVID vaccine. And then they announced last night that they don't expect to get the emergency use declaration until Q4, like late Q4. And so that brought the stock right back down to where it was trading before, go up 20% today. And I think someone in the comments made the note that Novavax has never, they've been around for 30 plus years and have never come out with a product. That's almost true. They have a really dismal record of taking products to market and being successful with it. They have developed some products that they sold off, mainly to have cash to keep going. And they developed an RSV vaccine and so on, sold some vaccines to Merck, but they've had a dismal record of taking products to market. And compare this to a company like Moderna, which is not a big company. They don't even have a field. They have a very small field force. It's more like people that work with payers and so on, government agencies. So kind of lobbyists in a way, but the key account managers, as they call them in the industry. But so they don't really have like a giant company like Pfizer does, or an AstraZeneca or J&J, and yet they're able to get these products to market pretty quickly. And they took advantage of Operation Warp Speed, run trials in parallel to one another, and they really got their act together. So yeah, Novavax is maybe the other side of this, that they're underperforming, or their leadership is really what's underperforming. And that is where leadership can make a big difference in the industry, is how they can get all the companies' resources aligned with bringing a product to market, including getting the right approvals. And they're not doing that very well.
And on COVID front, there are lots of more companies that require masks and vaccination and make it mandatory. For example, Amazon, JP Morgan are all requiring masks at work, and United Airlines requires vaccination. Those are just few examples. It seems like the vast majority of large companies are going to require one or the other or both soon enough. And at the same time, the data from Israel is coming out even more dismal than before. I saw one of the report on Israeli TV that 95% of severe patients in Israeli hospitals are vaccinated, 95%. And 85 to 90% of all hospitalizations in Israel are in fully vaccinated people. So clearly the effectiveness of vaccine is either waning, fading out. If it were ever there, I don't know. But it doesn't look effective right now. And so Israel is talking about new lockdowns right now. They're one of the most vaccinated countries, and they're planning to be locked down in another week or two. It was supposed to be in a month, but they actually trying to speed it up and lock down even sooner, as they're discussing right now.
There have been some other issues, like countries like Gibraltar, where I think it was something like 99% vaccinated. So there's only 30,000 people in the country. It's basically that island, right? But
it's a good test case.
What's that?
It's a good test case.
Right. Oh yeah, a great test case, because there are tourists that come and go, but almost everyone that lives there has been vaccinated, and they've seen a huge spike in cases and in deaths as well, some increase in deaths, and it's sort of it's not reduced either the likelihood of getting the new variants, or reduce the death rate, the fatality rate. And so there are some other cases where, like I think the Israel data actually showed that the vaccinated, as I think the number that you put out there would indicate, that the vaccinated were more likely to get the Delta variant than unvaccinated. That it maybe had it was supposed to provide immunity to some of the variants, but it doesn't appear to really be doing that. A lot of the reporting in the United States doesn't include any claim about the variant that someone has. There is some tracking of that, monitoring of that, and they do test a certain number of people for that, but it's not not every test. It's just a test of COVID. It's not a test.
Right.
And in most cases, it's not a test of what variant or what the lineage of it is, and so on. So it's very hard to wade through all of these statistics. A lot of very confusing, contrary information at the same time.
Right. And in Florida, the number of people in the hospital, the highest percentage of people in the hospitals is among the highest vaccination group, 65 plus. So the senior citizens who have the highest vaccination rate in Florida are mostly the ones who are in the hospital. So also doesn't look promising. I mean, you could always say that there could have been more of them if they were not vaccinated, perhaps, but it seems that we need some sort of clarity on data before we start doing the vaccine passports mandates. And another issue about those mandates is that people are finally pointing out the reality of vaccination, that the majority of Black people in the United States have not yet had a COVID vaccine. Only 28, maybe by now 30, I don't know, % of Black community have received COVID vaccine. And so now people are asserting that vaccine passports, which are trying to be mandatory in New York and California, for example, they will ban unvaccinated from venues like bars and restaurants, are indeed a new form of segregation, because now the majority of the Black population will face discrimination as the result of not taking the vaccine. So perhaps the vaccine passports will be canceled in New York and California because they're simply racist, like everything else.
The acting mayor of Boston is a Black woman, and she made a comparison in an interview that I saw part of vaccine passports, because of the issue that you're talking about, a lower vaccination rate among Black people and I think Hispanics as well.
Right.
That she compared vaccine passports to freedman's papers, like what a freed slave needed to have to prove that they deserved to be free when slavery was still around, and obviously implying that it was kind of there was a racial dimension to this vaccine passports, and it was very poignant comparison, because it's definitely not an American tradition for people to have to walk around with their papers, right?
Right, but media was not even talking about it. Just like a few weeks ago, they were blaming Trump and Trump supporters for not getting vaccinated. And now it seems like only 10 or 12% of Black people voted for Trump, yet the vast majority of them are not vaccinated. So it clearly has nothing to do with ideology, but media likes to see everything through the TDS syndrome, through the Trump voting prism. Everything is either you're with us or against us. They completely can't handle the nuance of the situation.
As I understand it, like in the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, people did not need papers to just like go to the store or something. You might need them if you were going, if you're like on vacation in Yalta or something like that.
Right.
You'd have to show, well, I have been given a visa to be here. But if you were just going around town or something like that, you didn't need papers.
No.
So even in totalitarian state, or
right.
You didn't need papers. And so how can that, I mean, how can that be? It just seems so
yeah, it's beyond any totalitarian thing that we had in the Soviet Union. Australia right now has literally army on the streets checking people's papers. They will gonna go door to door and check if you actually belong in the apartment you're in. The Soviet Union have never done that. They only check your papers, if you, like you said, you need to travel or you're buying a place or a job situation, not to go to the store. I don't even think I had a passport,
Right. No. Yeah, it's like so it's
right.
in Nazi Germany, you did need your papers, and they called them Kennkarte, and it was, you had to carry them with you. They could ask them.
And people wonder, how did Germany come about? How did fascism exist? Well, we are witnessing it right now, and people don't seem to mind. It's all for the better. Every crime has been done, and probably in the name of betterment of the people. So,
right.
Here we are.
Well, I mean, many of the things that Hitler put in place, and I don't mean Holocaust or anything like that, but like some of these totalitarian things, they were done by Kaisers in the past already. He was just bringing them back. Some of the the industrial state, and some of the militarization of everyday life. I mean, these were things that the Kaiser did in the 19th century already, and it wasn't new to Germany. They had that tradition for quite a while before Hitler came along.
Right, but the idea like you said, the idea to carry your documents everywhere you go, to the store, to the restaurant, is so absurd. I mean, even right now, I don't carry my driver's license or ID anywhere, because why would you if you don't drive at the moment? But at the same time, they seem to keep applying selective science. For example, de Blasio said he has no plans for teacher vaccine mandates. So they have mandates for the children to wear masks or work from home or study from home. They don't even know if they want to open schools in September, yet they don't want to mandate vaccines for the teachers. I thought the whole point was that why schools were closed until vaccines are not available. Now we have vaccines and they still don't want to open schools. So that's just labor union science.
Yeah, the speaking though of the surveillance state, this may be a good segue to crypto, because there's been a very hot debate about some provisions of the infrastructure bill, which is supposed to be voted on tomorrow. And or maybe not the whole bill tomorrow, but at least the amendments related to crypto. And there's provisions of the infrastructure bill that basically give the government complete control over cryptocurrency and require KYC of anyone who touches cryptocurrency in any way. And this is so far from being even implementable. I mean, they can't, there's no way that most of like a developer or a miner knows who is everybody that's transacting with them in some way. So so it would make it impossible, more or less, to do business with the United States or with anyone
like,
in there.
I heard some people were saying that this is basically a backdoor Bitcoin ban because, like you said, compliance makes it impossible. And so they want to criminalize all the nodes, the Lightning nodes, the Bitcoin wallets.
Yeah, so there's two amendments that are being offered. One is a little better, and that's the so-called Wyden-Lummis-Toomey amendment, named after the three sponsors in the Senate, two of whom are Republicans. One's a Democrat, Ron Wyden, and then there's the Warner-Portman one, which is the one that's actually been lobbied on Capitol Hill by Janet Yellen herself, trying to push for this. And there was an article in the Washington Post about her lobbying efforts on this one, which would only exempt proof of work platforms. So it would effectively exempt Bitcoin mining, but almost nothing else that's done in crypto. And it's really, I think, though, it's been interesting to see there's a handful of let's call them Bitcoiners, Bitcoin maximalists, I guess, who see this as a good thing. Well, finally, we're going to ban all these, shit coins or whatever. But the vast majority of people in crypto are taking it very seriously and as something that has to be opposed. That whether or not people like Ethereum or like this or that project, why shouldn't people be able to put their money wherever they want? And if it's risky, then so be it, as long as people are paying their taxes. It has very little to do with ensuring tax compliance, because there are many transactions, like, for example, if you do a barter transaction, you're legally required to report that on your taxes. Are they monitoring every body who might be doing a favor for somebody in exchange for having their house roofed or something like that, that you're exchanging favors? No, but I mean, technically, if you get value from it, you're supposed to pay or file for taxes on it. Anyway, these types of things. If you're but further, there's the blockchain itself, and the blockchain has every transaction back to the beginning. And so if you wanted to monitor people, just look at the public information that's right out there in the public. Why do you need to force people to file forms with the IRS when you can go out and analyze the data and see, and you can figure out who I am on there really easily? I mean, I'm not like trying to obscure myself. I'm not saying my address, but at the same time, you could find it out if you wanted to. And so I report everything because I figure they can know. So why do they need all this paperwork filed? It's ridiculous. So the Wyden-Lummis-Toomey amendment would exempt a lot of people that are involved, and I don't think it goes far enough in exempting people. I think that the IRS likes to talk about voluntary compliance, that they're not forcing people to at a gunpoint to file every single thing, but they're counting on people to be honest. And I think that's how a free society should work. but that's that vote on these amendments is supposedly tomorrow. And so there's been some big campaigns to get people to call their senators and so on to if I would prefer neither one of them or that none of it passes, including the infrastructure bill. But given that the infrastructure bill is likely to pass, I prefer that Wyden amendment, and it would be better. But then the other thing is that supposedly none of this would go into place until 2023, which is after the next election, in which the House could turn over and potentially the Senate, depending on who's doing the counting. So it could be the sort of thing that even though it passes, some of this never goes into place at all because you got a more friendly set of legislators in power, and they undo it. Like some of the things that Trump did have been undone unceremoniously in just a few months. So that's one option, I think. But any questions on that, Elaine? Or?
No, yeah, no, I think, thank you. It was a very good explanation. But
Yeah.
it's like every time the House or the Congress in general gets involved, they really don't understand the nuance and the details, especially something of that technical as cryptocurrency. They barely understand the internet in general. And
Yeah, there
Twitter.
was someone pointed out to me today that I was chatting with that back in the early 60s under JFK, there were some tax provisions that were passed that was kind of a money grab like this, passed that made it very difficult for money market funds to start in the US, to be started and managed in the US. And so what happened is it basically delayed the emergence of money markets in the United States until the 1970s. And that was what created the so-called euro dollar market, that a lot of US dollars went to Europe where they had money market funds. And so there was a spread that was traded between the dollar in Europe and the dollar in the United States. And so none of that would have emerged had the money market industry been allowed to develop and flourish in the United States. So this innovation, it won't just like stop because the United States doesn't like it. That was the 1960s when the United States was a much bigger portion of GDP. And now it's something like 17% of GDP and shrinking. And for the US to act like innovation is just going to stop because Janet Yellen doesn't like it, or Joe Biden or whoever doesn't like it. Well, Elizabeth Warren, well, it's not. It's just going to go. Innovation will just go to Switzerland and Estonia and Singapore and Japan, and it'll eventually come to the United States, but will be like the Mackinac Island of finance. If you've never been there, it's like a resort area between Michigan and Canada. And it's a little island where they don't allow any cars. So it's kind of really charming and quaint. You can stay at a bed and breakfast and you have to ride bikes around like to go to breakfast or whatever, but there are no cars. And so it's like a throwback to the 19th century in some ways, and they kept it really quaint. And although it's a fun place to visit, it's like, would you want to live in that world full time? Maybe some people would. And I understand that, but most people probably want a world where you can have a car, you can have modern conveniences and so on, antibiotics and anesthesia, and not be stuck in the 19th century. So I think
Wi-Fi, right?
Right. It's the same. I think it's the same thing, that it's like you can. I think that regulation could really help cryptocurrency if it's smart regulation, where some things, like if people are making fraudulent claims, that is bad. There was a case that the SEC, it was just announced yesterday, I think, that the SEC went after some people who were claiming to have a DeFi money market fund on Ethereum on Ethereum, and it wasn't DeFi at all. What they were doing was they were taking investors' money and they were putting it into title loans, which car title loans, which if you know is one of the shadiest areas of finance at all. It's like the bottom of the barrel, because the people are giving up their title in exchange for like a small loan, and the cars aren't. I mean, what can you get for a used car? You get whatever the buyer is going to pay. So often the loan is worth more than the liquidation value of the car. And so these are really crappy loans. And if you actually had to collect on them, I mean, you're like taking some not very well off person's car away. It's really scummy. So I would take the base, like to call this a DeFi fund. Well, anyway, the SEC has fined them something like $30 million for promoting this because they were making fraudulent claims. I am all for things like that, which if it's fraud, where they're saying one thing and the truth is something else, but just innovation and being able to put your money where you want to put it, and people are being honest. I don't understand the problem with that.
Right.
But
yeah, but looks like Bitcoin and Ethereum pretty much had a really nice run up, and it seems to continue. What do you?
Yeah, and it's I think that the real key for Bitcoin is and it's been so long since Bitcoin was at this level here, but I think that the and so my lines aren't drawn out here, but so I'll do that. But yeah, so Bitcoin's right above this, one of these levels here, which is now this one is probably drawn a little bit high, 42,500. It might be a little below that. I think really like the 42,000 level is a critical level. If Bitcoin can stay above that, that's great. However, it might pull back over the weekend because I think some of the fears about these bills or the amendments, it could create some volatility, and I anticipate that. Ethereum's been on a huge run, and it went right up to resistance and passed it a little bit today, but then pulled back. And this was due to what was called the London upgrade, which was the main one within that was the improvement proposal 1559. And what this did is it shifted the fee structure a little bit and made, in times that Ethereum is really, the network's really busy, it actually makes it a deflationary currency, or it could be. And so it was perceived as having gone off successfully, that this upgrade happened without any problems, and that went into place yesterday morning. But it ran up into that and then has rallied since then. And so that's I think it might pull back just because it's kind of, the news is over now. There's more things coming for Ethereum. I don't think it's I think it's in kind of a bull mode, but because it's had such a strong rally, it might shrug off some of the negatives that come up over the next few days. But I think there could be a lot of volatility. Even on this run up, we've had some really big swings that have been 8-10% in a day. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I think we've had that kind of move today. It went from 27.14 up to 29.51. So that's more than 10% move and our swing in one day. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that over the weekend as well. But the real, I think the real challenge is Bitcoin staying above the 42,000 level. And that's kind of, if it can stay above this level, I think it's back in neutral territory. And it's not necessarily bullish, but it's not, the bear thesis has been kind of shaken off. And Ethereum getting above 2,900, that it's kind of the 42,000 of Bitcoin, I think, it puts it back in this neutral territory. And it was above this 3,200 level for just a handful of days, less than 2 weeks. And so it was almost like this was just a blow off top, really, more than a legitimate move. But it was there. The prices were real, but it was more of a blow off. But Bitcoin's blow off was a lot more gentle. I don't know if I'd call it a top, but it wasn't a blow off in the same way as Ethereum blew off. But I think getting back above 2,900 and jogging around in this range here would be really bullish in the long term, and it would shake off some of the bear thesis that's been pretty active. But I think that the other things that we talked about both Coinbase and Galaxy, and Coinbase has had a nice rally.
Nice move.
Yeah, really nice rally, and it's closed this gap from back not long after the IPO in May. I think the actual IPO was in April, but here in May it gapped down, and it has never closed that gap, and it appeared to close that gap today. So I think if the market stays stable, this rally can continue, and then the same with there wasn't the sort of gap for Galaxy Digital, but this one has had a really nice move off its low recently, and so this one is a lot less liquid than Coinbase, so it can have these kind of crazy moves down to 11 or whatever from 20 for apparently no reason. But it seems to have rallied back. It's right just under 19 now. So I think there's especially if it just pulls back a little bit on Monday, if there's a little bit of a sell-off having to do with whatever the Senate does, then it may be a good opportunity, because I don't think that this rally is over.
Right, and if you look at Ethereum, if it moves to 3,400 or close to that next level, it's almost 100% move off the low.
Oh yeah, that's
in
right.
Less than a month or so. It's, the moves in these currencies cryptocurrencies are amazing.
It's the way to think about this, I think, Ethereum it really is an option on the platform itself. It's like a call option on the future of decentralized finance. And so but it's but then the real driver, I think, of this most recent rally, or the catalyst, has been this London upgrade, which now the next hurdle. This was something that a lot of the detractors, bears, were saying, well, it won't pass because the miners won't like it. They'll fight it. They'll fork it, or they'll.
Wasn't that a fork as well?
Well, it was a fork, but there wasn't an alt fork that anyone managed. So there was consensus around the fork, and which means there's not like a new Ethereum coin or something like that, like there was with Bitcoin 2 or 3 years ago, when like Bitcoin Cash forked off of Bitcoin, and now if you had 10 Bitcoin before, now you have 10 of each. But with this, there wasn't any alternative that anyone managed. But the next big hurdle will be what's called the merge, and that's the merge with Ethereum, what's called Ethereum 2.0, which is really the switch to proof of stake. And that is likely to come, if not by the end of the year, then in Q1 of next year. And that will drastically lower the fees, which have been the biggest barrier to adoption. I think it's quite expensive sometimes. Like right now, there's a lot of excitement, and so transaction fees have gone up. But with proof of stake, the transaction fees will fall by something like 90%, and it will be it'll be the best thing for long-term adoption. Yeah, but yeah, so I think that it could. I'm thinking that it could pull back a little bit. The Ethereum has rallied quite a bit. It's rallied about, I think, about 20% against Bitcoin from this recent low. So maybe Bitcoin can catch up a little bit. Ethereum kind of takes a breather, and Bitcoin rallies a little bit from here. I think could be. I think it's a reasonable chance of that happening.
Right, and 50,000 would be the nice round number for it.
Not just that, it's also just above 50,000 is the $1 trillion valuation and market cap, and so I think it's like around 51, 52. I don't know the precise number, but it's I think it's an important number. It's kind of the constructal number, I think, for Bitcoin, is that $1 trillion valuation.
Right.
It did spend a good couple months above that level. It first broke above that level in February, and briefly, or I think, yeah, briefly dipped below it, but it wasn't until here in May that it crashed below it and then it stayed below that. So I do think I agree, 50,000 is important, but right above that, if it can crack that $1 trillion value market cap again, that's a big psychological number. And I think that's been true from the beginning, that when I talked with Vic on this show back in, I think it was January, I pointed that out, that I think the $1 trillion valuation, it's a important psychological level for Bitcoin. Maybe down the line it will be for Ethereum. I don't think that's not in the near future, but definitely for Bitcoin it is. It's just 20% above where we are right now.
Let's look at the gold daily chart as the opposite of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Gold
right.
had a really nice move today. Well, not so nice if you're long, I guess. It was down 2.5%. And we could see that, perhaps like Victor was saying, that Bitcoin and other digital currencies have kind of replaced gold as a safety or inflationary or alternative currency status. And so gold hasn't been doing much in a very long time.
Yeah, and it was really despite all of the inflation fears and legitimate inflation fears, and the rest of the commodities markets really rocketing over the last year, maybe up until February or March. Yeah, gold really has underperformed, and silver, they both underperformed during that time. And there have been a lot of people who thought they were the next to rally, but they really haven't responded. They did respond. I mean, at the time that they were above the current level back in 2010, 2011, when there were fears about like Greece and so on defaulting on its loans, and whether the cycle of bailouts for the so-called pigs in Europe. All these were things that were driving gold up at that time. But you're right or Victor's right, that I think that to some degree, and it's because of the liquidity of Bitcoin and the ability to trade large amounts of value. You can do that with futures markets, but it's with the physical, at least, you'd have to, how much gold can you carry around with you? Whereas Bitcoin, there's no transact or carrying costs for Bitcoin.
Right. And at the same time, if something severe happens and we have some attack that takes the internet offline, you can't really pay with Bitcoin, but you could pay with gold coins. So there is like, it's a hedge for different situations, I guess.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I don't think that there's, I don't think that gold is dead. I mean, I think that it's part of a good portfolio, personally. And I trade it. I hold some gold, but I traded some, but not as much as I trade cryptocurrency, because I think those markets are a little bit more exciting, and maybe the volatility in them is even greater than gold, which gold was famously,
Right.
for many years, the most volatile. I mean, if you really want to, not be able to sleep at night, trade gold, right? But Bitcoin or Ethereum are 10 times the volatility of gold. So it's and you can get similar leverage if you're, depending on where you trade. So it's very the speculative potential, and then with the emergence of things like decentralized finance, even the hedging potential is, or the hedging opportunities are a lot easier than what you can do with precious metals. But
Right. And also let's look at the dollar chart. Dollar also had a very good week. The opposite of gold, I would say.
the opposite of gold, but also, I mean, what really was unusual was bonds were down so big today, and so we had I mean, it wasn't the same type of move as we had move up in dollar, but
Right.
but often we see the dollar and bonds move together, but here they were moving opposite one another. So it was it's interesting to see. I'm not surprised to see gold move opposite the dollar, or some of these other commodities move opposite the dollar, but it is a little surprising to see bonds move opposite the dollar, just because of how capital typically flows.
Right. Yes. Copper was also down for the week, and some other commodities as well. But dollar does look like it's still in place to break out from that range it's been in for a while.
Well, it would really catch a lot of traders by surprise if the dollar broke out, the S&P
And the
500 kept
bonds,
rallying, and bonds cracked here. That would really shake up a lot of the way people are positioned, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. So next week could be interesting, but I was expecting some interesting stuff this week. Nothing happened. So maybe we're in that low, sleepy August time until everything moves, just drifts up ever so slowly until something happens and we have a large move. It seems like we're in one of those markets where we're just going to be drifting up slowly until some event that shakes out traders.
Well, what often happens with cryptocurrency, and this is one of the I think reasons it's kind of exciting to trade sometimes, is that what is very typically seen as, like, if you look at the Bitcoin futures chart, it never, I mean, it only traded below, for example, its 200-day moving average for just a few weeks, really. And whereas if you look at Bitcoin, for months, it's trading under its 200-day moving average. And the reason for that is that a lot of the big down moves were over the weekends, and when the futures don't trade. So I think we could see something similar this weekend, that we could see a little bit of depending on what happens with these bill, maybe it's perfectly fine, and nothing bad will happen. It's a non-issue, but I think it could be that we see some big swings, and but where we open in the bond market, or in the futures market on Sunday night, will be exactly where it closed are very not very far from where it closed, until you just won't see any of that volatility on the futures chart.
Okay.
But you'll see, you know, a big stick on or a stick or two on the Bitcoin chart.
Thank you, Andy. The weekend should be exciting with all of that infrastructure craziness happening. And it's interesting how the infrastructure bill includes so much just stuff that's unrelated to infrastructure.
It's like, yeah, it's like 100 billion of infrastructure and like 900 billion of like wishful thinking or whatever, you know, we're gonna, you know, cure poverty or something like that, or, yeah, or we're going to end cancer, and, you know, these types of crazy promises that won't come true. But yeah, it's just there's a lot of padding in there, and it's kind of sad. So we'll see what happens with the cryptocurrency, but with the infrastructure bill in general, I think it could push markets on Monday, depending on how negative the bill ends up being.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.